Pardon the interruption, but we have some big news breaking out of the Southwest Preparatory Conference, and you know who we turn to when these things arise. It is SPC analyst, seasoned SPC analyst at this point, Jack Klosek. Familiar face on the program, Jack. We always appreciate your knowledge, and it seems like there's a lot of moving parts in the SPC, more than I was even aware of up to this point. Number one, how are you doing? Number two, what are your thoughts on the preliminary shakeup that's going on in the Southwest Preparatory Conference?
Hey Wes, it's great to be back on the program. I know you guys saw me a couple times last year and looking forward to continuing doing that. Um, finished the year strong at school, got to work with the Columbia baseball team who are having a great season. They're going to be in the Hattiesburg Regional against Southern Miss. Um, you know, there's a lot going on, a lot of history involved, and some big changes are coming to SBC. I'm looking forward to dive into it. And as always, I'm grateful to have a platform that, Wes, Walker, and Ryan allow me to do this. And looking forward to being back on y'all's screen. So I'm ready to get into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the biggest things that we pride ourselves in is the fact that we've kind of assembled this mass of people that are all experts in their respective fields, whether it's Waverly that was in D4, Jack and SPC. It's really, really cool to be an ESPN type brand and have, our Brian Windhorse, or I'm not going to say Stephen A because Stephen A doesn't know anything, but all this, it's really fun to have. But all pleasantries aside, Jack, we can take this whatever direction you like, but the first thing that I was tipped off to and that everyone knows now are the two TAP schools that are now moving back to the Southwest Preparatory Conference. That is TMI, the Texas Military Institute, and then St. Mary's Hall. TMI has been in existence since 1893. They left the Southwest Preparatory Conference in 1970. Very good in basketball. Monty Williams, formerly of the Pistons, is currently their head coach. St. Mary's Hall was founded in 1879. Is actually now it's older than any current or former SPC school. They were a member of the Southwest Preparatory Conference until 2016. They are now coming back along with TMI in 2026. Jack, TMI, more of a name brand to the casual listener than St. Mary's Hall, especially for basketball. Not a whole lot to scoff at football, but it will change the dynamics of 4A and 3A because there is now another team. Anything from your perspective that sticks out with these two teams joining the ranks?
Yeah, so let's start with St. Mary's Hall. St. Mary's was a part of SPC up until 2016, as you mentioned. I know for a time they played an independent schedule, and they've been a team that's, as you know, has been in six man. My understanding is they're going to work to get up to the point where they can compete in SPC during the next realignment cycle in 2026, and they'd play in 3A. Kincaid, which is kind of where I base a lot of my knowledge off of, never really played them. I know we used to play them in baseball, and they were not a good baseball team. I'm not sure they even. This is no slight, but I don't even think they had a fence at their field at one point in time. Um, I've they've been a freelance team for football for some time. I'm pulling up, some historical kind of records, and they've been, even though they were in SPC, they were freelance for a long time. Even if you go back to 2015, 2016, 2014, or not before 2016, 2013, 2014, 2012. If you look up on their max preps, and I've been doing that because there's just a lot of information, you're going to see they were playing a freelance schedule, playing some not great teams. St. Dominic Savio, they were playing Village. Savio's improved a little bit. They were playing John Cooper when they had just started their program, St. Stephen's, St. Andrews. So this is a program that's really been through a lot. It's kind of a bottom feeder program. But I think it's very exciting that they're joining. It's a new challenge for the school. Kincaid's current headmaster, Jonathan Eads, who I have a great relationship with and respect deeply, and he came from St. Mary's Hall, so there's a little bit of a connection there between that and Kincaid. In terms of how they've done in 3A, I think they're like a middle of the pack, or not in 3A, excuse me, in six man, they're a middle of the pack team. They play Emory Weiner or Logos Prep Academy. I'm not really up to date with a lot of the six man stuff. I know that Lone Star Christian Sports Network does a really good job with that, and those guys over there do a great job. So in terms of that, like they'd be better adept at answering that kind of stuff. But I think it's a fun challenge for them. And I'm excited to see what comes of it. And if we turn to TMI, that's a team that's and been an 11-man team. I believe they're in TAPS D1. They have a tough district. If you're playing Antonian and Central Catholic and St. Thomas, they're not really competing there. Very historic school. I think they probably have a better chance to compete right out of the gate. I know they're an okay team. If they play like a smaller public school, like I think last year they played maybe like Bruni or something like that, like a smaller 2A, 3A program, which are rather commensurate with like with some of the smaller SPC 3A schools. I think they could compete. I think they're in a better position. But at the same time, I think it's exciting. It's exciting when you get fresh blood. The SPC is kind of like, I've heard it described as like a smaller kind of like historic Ivy League of Texas, and it used to be schools in Oklahoma. I think it's cool when you get new blood, and those are very historic and very strong academic schools. And I'm excited to see how they compete. We love to see like what Coach KJ has done over at Green Hill. Like we like to see what our Coach Eisenman has done at Houston Christian. When programs are really turned around, or even Coach DeHaven at John Cooper. I'm excited to see if maybe they can turn into that kind of a story. But that's kind of the cliff notes there, and then I'm gonna get into a little bit of some more stuff. But Wes, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. My 30,000 foot takeaway, because obviously I'm much less in the weeds than you are with the SBC, but my 30,000 foot takeaway is that this is interesting. I think it's good for the conference to have new blood. It doesn't move the needle in football, obviously. St. Mary's is kind of like, the St. Andrews position, where much smaller, transitioning to 11 man. We'll see how they do there. It's going to be interesting to see how they compete. I mean, like you said, I think they have a better chance to compete. However, the SBC 4A has teams that are some of the best in private school, regardless, with Kincaid and Episcopal. We'll see how St. John's fares moving forward. Losing Cole Allen's going to be big, and that was
Mhm.
essentially their entire team. I'm not sure how they're going to fit in the landscape of things. St. Mark's will be better than they are. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up. So you mentioned St. Andrews. I want to mention the other Austin school, St. Stephen's. So St. Stephen's is an SPC member. They're we I used to play against them in baseball. St. Stephen's and St. Andrews really have are not great baseball programs, and unfortunately, when I was in SPC, football has always kind of had its own structure, whether it be D1, D2, which was the kind of the structure from the 90s up until 2011, then large school and small school, which was the structure through 2015, and then 4A and 3A, which has been the structure ever since. St. Stephen's and St. Andrews, so they used to be members of 3A. And then, probably around 2018, 2019, they merged and they became the Austin Saints. And if you went to those schools, you would play together as a team and compete against the 3A schools. Then their programs kind of fell into disarray. St. Stephen's recently has been a really strong six-man program, but they play football not affiliated with SPC. St. Andrews and Coach Cantrell over there, what they did was they rebuilt the football program from the ground up. So when I was a senior at Kincaid in 2021, our JV actually played St. Andrews varsity. So they played a JV schedule one year, and then they played a couple years of just like a freelance schedule. And last year they joined the SPC 3A ranks, and they had some growing pains for sure. I want to say they went 2-8. I'm gonna check that as we speak.
And they went 0-6 in conference.
0-6 in conference. I think they won a couple games, but I think they beat, the Village School and maybe like St. Francis, who's also a brand new 11-man team. And maybe they beat a couple not great public schools in Austin Northeast and the LASA, which is I think the Liberal Arts and Science Academy. Yeah. So they beat Northeast, they beat St. Francis, and then they lost every SPC game. I mean, they were able to put up points in some games. They put 27 on Oak Ridge, they put 35 on Fort Worth Country Day, but they have a lot of room to grow. St. Stephen's is looking to do the same thing. If they can ramp it up in time, I think their goal is to be able to play 11 man in 2026. This year, my understanding is they're going to play 11 man in as a freelance team, just as St. Andrews did. So, that is and if we look at that, it's going to be a shakeup in 2026. The other big shakeup, which are coming, and there are a couple, is you put those aside. In 2026, we have realignment. Green Hill, for the first time since 2019, will be a member of SPC 4A, and Houston Christian, for the first time since 2021, will be a member of SPC 4A. So Houston Christian and Green Hill move up, and shockingly to me, but I understand from a numbers perspective, for the first time in probably a decade, I would say probably a decade, Episcopal School of Dallas will be moving down to 3A for the foreseeable future. That was the big bombshell to me. I mean, 4 years ago, Chase Kennedy and co, they went 10-0, and they beat us in the regular season, and they're going to be going down, and that should be, if Coach Williams can keep, kind of the trajectory they've been on going, that's probably my favorite to win it in 2026. I want to see what they look like this year, but I know they lost Siler Cook to Parrish, and I want to say he's a 26 to begin with, so that wouldn't have affected things, but I want to see how they compete. But that was a big one for me, Wes. Episcopal School of Dallas moving down.
Yeah, that when you told me that in the pre-show, that opened my eyes a little bit because people have forgotten the past couple years. But when we started the program, like you said, with guys like Chase Kennedy, they're going, 10-2 overall, 5-1 or 5-0 in SPC play. I mean, that was basically, the Kincaid of those years. I mean,
Hmm.
very, very solid, established program, especially in kind of a vacuum that might start to open up in 3A with Houston Christian, the reigning state champion, leaving. TVS obviously stays. It'll be interesting to see how they do. I mean, you have to assume that ESD probably is not probably, they should be the favorite in
That
2026, barring any huge move. Now, the interesting thing to me is, and all this is very much an aside, their program seems to be suffering from the Parrish effect, where Parrish seems to take a lot of talent in that area.
for sure.
I'll be interested to see how much longer that continues, as well as, is that going to matter in 3A? Because obviously the competition and the level of that is less. Are they going to need those type of athletes to win in 3A? It will be interesting. There's a lot of time between now and the 2026 season, but that's just kind of something to look at there.
Yeah, and I know I believe his last name is Coach Swinford. I believe he was the offensive coordinator at ESD for a while, and I think not I think he was at Parrish. I don't know if he's
He's
still
currently
there.
still at Parrish.
Yeah, so Coach Swinford's over there, and he did a good job when he was at ESD, and it'll be interesting. And it's kind of a return to the past, and the next kind of thing we've talked about, I wanted to talk about. So we've talked about, we got TMI and St. Mary's joining 3A. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I did a little bit more digging. Even in St. Mary's, always kind of played a freelance schedule. They were in SPC for other sports, like I said, Kincaid, baseball, which is kind of my other kind of source of knowledge. Baseball, up until I was a senior, used to do North Zone and South Zone. So when I was a senior, it was Kincaid, St. John's, Houston Christian, Episcopal, Cooper, St. Andrews, St. Stephen's. Previously, before St. Mary's left, St. Mary's was a part of that. Baseball changed to do 4A and 3A now, which I personally don't like, but this is a football talk show, not a baseball talk show. And, maybe I can get with Texas high school baseball in the spring and we can have a powwow about why I think that it shouldn't be 3A and 4A as they currently do it. I think it's a completely rinky-dink tournament the way they do it now. I mean, and I say that even though Kincaid just went out and won, we beat Episcopal to win SPC in baseball. But putting that aside, I think it would be helpful. Every year we do this, and TAPS is kind of very structured. They have their realignments. You understand it's 3 to 4 rounds of the playoffs. But SPC has been very weird, and it's kind of a little like the current Ivy League, where it's like, there's not really playoffs. I guess in the Ivy League they have no playoffs, and they have a weird tiebreaker. But SPC also has weird tiebreakers, and it's, we had a situation, I believe, you know, I think it was maybe even last year where, you had Kincaid, St. John's, and Episcopal all going 3-1, but only two teams go in, and
Keep in mind,
did
half our job for you at like the tail end of every season is we bring you in and say, explain this 3-page long tiebreaker and what the
yeah,
scenarios are.
and it's ridiculous, and we've seen a lot of upsets, and like that's what I love about this league. Like we've seen less talented teams beat more talented teams. We've seen St. John's take it to Episcopal. We've
But
seen
ultimately, these less talented teams don't get rewarded because only 2 teams play for the title.
cor cor correct, and I mean I shouldn't even say that. I mean maybe like in 2020. I'm trying to do the years now. Has St. John's beaten Episcopal the past two? No, St. John's won in 23, and last year they lost in a heartbreaker. That's right. I
Yep.
mean, 23, like they had some really talented pieces. I think that Episcopal team probably had a little bit more talent, but St. John's was no slouch. But putting that aside, I think it'd be helpful for the audience. This is actually kind of how I got connected with Wes and Walker. Ryan was in 2022, my freshman year at school. There was a lot of confusion about SPC that year, and I just reached out and kind of gave and on DM and on direct message on Instagram and kind of explained the history of it. I want to do that in greater depth so that the viewers can kind of understand the league a little better. So I want to flash us back to 1988. SBC is a very, very historic league. It's been around for decades and decades, probably since um, I want to say the 50s. Yeah, 1953 was the first year. St. John's was the first champion, and I don't know that off the top of my head. I just quickly peeked at my notes screen. But some of the stuff I do know off the top of my head, and you're gonna get to hear that now. So it's 1988. Previously, there were no playoffs. It was North Zone, South Zone. If you were in the North, you played teams in the North. You were in the South. We know basic geography. You can kind of figure out what that would have been. Then they did a playoff format. So 1988, the divisions start playing each other. The North and South start playing each other, and you get Division One and Division Two, which were based on enrollment. Division One was Kincaid, St. John's, St. Mark's, Episcopal, Greenhill, and then the two former Oklahoma schools, which are Cassidy and Holland Hall. Both of those teams have they've won SPC titles. At times they were very good. My understanding is as I recently noticed Cassidy's kind of struggling and was maybe playing like a freelance type deal, and now they're like in a smaller conference. I think Holland Hall is a pretty solid program. I know they've won a little bit. I know they played All Saints in years past, and because that was kind of a rivalry, and All Saints isn't an SPC anymore. We'll talk about All Saints in a moment because they're important to this story. So that was Division One. Division Two was an even bigger mess. Was Trinity Valley, All Saints, Cistercian, St. Stephen, St. Andrews, Fort Worth Country Day, Oak Ridge, and Episcopal School of Dallas. So that's what it was through the 2011 season, and it was the kind of the same structure as it was now, where it's 10-game regular season or nine games with a bye, and you play your conference opponents. Top two teams by record play in a 1-game playoff. The last year that this was in existence for Kincaid, as it turned out, Kincaid and St. John's went into the last week both undefeated, and the coaches agreed to make the game at Rice actually the SPC championship. So they shortened their season. So rather, they would have had to play 2 weeks in a row instead of doing they play 2 weeks in a row and one game doesn't matter, or you throw your JV guys out there and it just doesn't matter who wins. They made that the championship. So that was the last year of the D1, D2 format. From 2012 to 2015, they did something called large school and small school for the playoffs. So by enrollment, they would, you would be seeded into the playoffs, and they expanded the playoffs. So it was a 9-game regular season, 2 games of playoffs. So they had, so 4 teams made it for, large school, and 4 teams made it for small school. But what gets weirder is that's not how the regular season worked. They divided it into kind of a rudimentary North Zone and South Zone again, like they had done before 1988. Through the lens of Kincaid, and I'm saying that because that's my alma mater, from 2012 and 2013, it was Episcopal, St. John's, Kincaid, Houston Christian, Fort Worth Country Day, Trinity Valley, and St. Andrews. And yes, you heard me correctly. Kincaid played St. Andrews in a regular season SPC counter game in 2012 and 2013. They also played Trinity Valley. They also played Country Day. In 2014 and 2015, same exact format, but they had realignment. So it was Kincaid, Episcopal, Houston Christian, St. John's, and you add an Episcopal School of Dallas and Cistercian. So that's how it was through the 2015 season. Kincaid made it to the SPC Championship all four of those seasons. In 2012, they played St. Mark's in the semis, won, and then lost to Episcopal. 2013, they played ESD in the semis, played Episcopal, played St. Mark's in the championship, beat St. Mark's, won an SPC title. 2014, they played All Saints in the semis, and then lost to Episcopal in the title. And then in 2015, they played St. Mark's in the semis, beat Episcopal in the title. After that, we split up into 4A and 3A, which is what the current format is. And you had the alignments for 2016 and 2017. That was Kincaid, St. John's, Houston Christian, Episcopal, St. Mark's, and Episcopal School of Dallas. And then kind of the aforementioned 3A schools. Cooper started playing football then, St. Stephen's, St. Andrews, and All Saints was in for 2016 only. And All Saints won the SBC title in 2016. That's why I said All Saints was important. As is, well documented, All Saints left the conference after 2016. So in 2017, it was the same schools, just minus All Saints. In the lower division, you had Country Day, you had Oak Ridge, you had Cistercian, and that's how it was. And then in 2018, 2019, it was the same exact thing, but Green Hill moved up. And then 2020, it was, everybody played a freelance schedule. 2021, Green Hill moved back down. And when I was a senior, it was Kincaid, St. Mark's, Kincaid, Houston Christian, Episcopal St. John, St. Mark's, Episcopal School of Dallas. Then, in 2022, 2023, Houston Christian moved down. And remember, it was only a 5-team conference for 2022 and 2023. There were only 4 conference games. And then last year, 2024, Cooper moves up. So it's really, really interesting. And I give that history because there's going to potentially be, and I'm not sure, but I'm hearing rumblings that, there is an important vote coming up in SPC and details are being worked out. But I can confirm, you heard it here first, that SPC is looking at extending their postseason another week come 2026. And that is what the history lesson is for. We would see for the first time in 11 years, there would be multiple rounds of playoffs. Now, in terms of what that would look like, that is pure speculation on my part, but I can confirm that SPC is looking at extending their postseason another week, which I personally am very excited about and very much in favor of. And Wes, I would welcome your thoughts, but that's really what I've been waiting to get to. SPC I think has a chance to do something really, really cool here. It adds a lot of flair to the conference. It brings excitement to the 3A division where, there may not be as much talent, but you're going to have a lot of guys gunning for it. If you look at what we project, if you take, what we believe to be 4A in 2026, and that's 7 teams. So you would think if it's 2 rounds of playoffs, 4 teams make it. And, you could probably figure that Episcopal, Kincaid, and St. John's were locks to make that, but who gets in as the 4th seed? Is it St. Mark's? Is it Green Hill? Is it Houston Christian? Is it Cooper? That adds some real excitement. And I can tell you from, talking with my old Kincaid coaches, even when I was there and asking why don't we have more playoffs, there were teams that sometimes played spoiler. Less talented, like in 2015 is a really good example. Kincaid, tackled an Episcopal team with Jalen Waddle, Marvin Wilson, and Walker Little, and won that game. And Kincaid was very, very talented. Josh Williams was on that team. A lot of other guys. But the Young brothers, Michael Goldak, there were a lot of great players then. But that's the kind of stuff that allowing that to happen, does. Like Kincaid would not have gotten in that year. They lost to ESD and Episcopal in the regular season. So like under the format just a year later, they probably wouldn't have even made the playoffs. It will be very interesting, and the 3A is just the wild, wild west. I mean, this, you could see something as crazy as, maybe TMI comes out, ready to draw blows, and they come out, they got a puncher's chance, and they sneak in as the 4 seed. Like that's the kind of excitement I'm here for. Nothing is official yet. Their details are still being worked out, but and they're looking into it. Nothing is confirmed, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying this is going to happen. But I can confirm that this is being talked about, and it will be interesting to see, if the headmasters, heads of school, athletic directors, SPC board, what direction they want to take this in. But I think this is good. I really think this is good, and it's going to level the playing field a little bit with TAPS. There's going to be more excitement involved. I'm really, really excited to see how it turns out. But Wes, I want to turn it over to you because I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah, my base thoughts is that we've been wandering through the wilderness for about 40 years, and the heavens have opened up and manna is flowing down, and finally we see the promised land. This is something we have clamored for years on this program, really since it started. I mean, you can go back to really any of our episodes around late September, early mid-October, and hopefully the SPC board doesn't watch this, but I think we have made like several pointed comment saying if we don't implement playoffs, TXPS will be at your door and we will be demanding this happens. It's just St. John's is the most poignant example that comes to mind in that the fact that they didn't get a shot at a championship game the past 2 years with Cole Allen is it's incredibly hard. And obviously you can come back with the argument, well, they didn't win enough games too. Well, yeah, but when you limit that to two teams, it just doesn't seem fair. And obviously, the counter argument is, well, there's not nearly as many teams in the SPC as there are in TAPS, so maybe just keep it to two. And even that, in 2025, I mean, I think, especially to give the kids a playoff format and to give more teams and more kids the opportunity to say that you played in a playoff type game and give some of these teams chances that are more. You think St. John's wasn't a good team to play spoiler in a playoff type format? I think this is a great move. I'm curious to see, and I'll turn it back to you in a second to see maybe what the roadblocks might be or the reasons why this wouldn't go through, because clearly they haven't implemented it, or it's been suspended basically for the past several years. However, I think 14 playoff is perfect given the size. I think, in 4A that lets four teams in, three teams out, and 3A somewhere similar. I'm curious to see because you're more tied in with the SPC and the culture and the mindsets of some of these schools. And obviously, I'm asking you to forecast something impossible. Do you anticipate that this clears from your vantage point? And if not, would there be a reason why they would keep this the way it is with two teams?
It's always tough to make a prediction like that, but based on what I've heard, what I've read, who I've spoken to, as well as kind of my own intuition, I do think it's going to pass. And if I'm wrong on that, I'm wrong on that. I do think it's going to pass. I think, kind of what my read on it is it's due. This is overdue. And I think it's the right thing to do. I think it adds a lot more flair to, however they want to do it. Um, do they, do they keep it a 10 game schedule? Do they return to, I didn't mention in 2012, through 2015, they played a 9 game schedule and then 2 playoff games. Does everybody now have to play a 9 game schedule, when you start later? What does that look like? Who hosts it? SPC assigns a host site for every season. It's like uniform. But as it's turned out, it's been Kincaid and Episcopal almost every year. So what they used to do was didn't matter. You'd have like, in 2015, for example, Kincaid played Episcopal in the SBC championship, and the game was in Round Rock. In 2014, Kincaid played Episcopal, and the game was at Dallas Jesuit. In 2013, Kincaid played St. Mark's. The game was in Brewer, at Brewer High School. In 2012, Kincaid played Episcopal again, and the game was at oh my God, HEB Stadium in Hearst, or in Euless, where I think like that's where LD Bell and Trinity
Bedford, I
and
think.
Euless Trinity Bedford, excuse me. So, but then, starting in 2017, because in 2016 Episcopal and All Saints played, so they met in the middle and they played at Vandegrift High School in Austin. 2017, the game was at U of H, and it's been held at U of H. It's been held at Del Mar, which is an HISD stadium. It's been held at Butler, which is an HISD stadium. Um, I think, it was at, and it's been at what, U of H the past 2 years? It's been back at U of A. Yeah, it was at U of H the past 2 years.
So here's the interesting thing for me, talking especially about, and something you brought up, talking about the site of the games. There's one of two ways to do this. The first of which is certainly not for the championship, I hope, but maybe for the semifinal games, the higher seed host. Well, if you look at it
And
from the
that's how they done
perspective,
it. That's how they did it previously. But
right.
by the way,
If you look at this from the perspective of a first round playoff game, that makes sense. That's how it works everywhere. If you look at it from the perspective of a state semifinal game, it makes no sense. Nowhere does that. I am in the camp of it should be at a neutral site. It should
hmm
not be at a home field. This is coming from somebody that advocated strongly for home field games in first and second round. However, in my view, this isn't first or second round. This is a state semifinal game with this much on the line. It needs to be neutral site. I'm curious to see if I think you hold a similar opinion, but is that
yeah,
accurate?
I do because I think it adds to the allure of the playoffs. I think that it should be neutral. I understand the argument, like, yeah, you may finish higher in the regular season. You want that home field advantage. And that's how they previously did it. So, you would play at the higher seed school for in 2012 to 2015, you play at the higher seed school, and then playoffs would be a neutral site. What will be interesting is what weekend do they do it? So, as I mentioned, SPC grants for each season a host city. So my senior year, and the reason why we played at Dallas Jesuit was because the Dallas was the host, and we were playing ESD. So we actually did get to do a road trip, and that game was at Dallas Jesuit. But the past several years, sometimes it's in Houston, sometimes it's not, but it doesn't matter because, rightfully so. Why are you going to make Kincaid and Episcopal travel to play a game? That makes it harder for their fans to go. That makes it harder for the Houston media to go. So, what if it's an all, what happens in 2026? Let's say it's, SPC week and Kincaid, Houston Christian, Episcopal, and sorry, Kincaid, St. John's, Episcopal, and let's just throw out Houston Christian get in. Are you going to make those four schools play in Dallas? Like, and I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Do you do, two neutral sites? Do you book out Del Mar Stadium, or, like a big public school stadium, or, maybe you catch Rice when they're gone? Do you book out Rice for the day and do semifinal game in the afternoon, and, one game in the afternoon, one game in the evening? Do you do, let's say Kincaid's the one, and, Cooper's the four? Does Cooper go to Kincaid, and then St. John's the three and Episcopal's the two, and then you go there? I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. That'll be very interesting to see. I think it's probably right to do neutral site. I wouldn't be mad if they did the higher seed. I think it has more of a small town feel, but at the same time, like I think for playoff games, you want to have that neutral site. I know from a player's perspective, it's really cool getting to play at a neutral site at a big stadium. When we played at Dallas Jesuit, that was awesome. Like, I know guys have played at Del Mar, like that's a big HISD stadium. We did the game when it was at CE King. That was awesome. U of H was really cool. I didn't get to play there or cover that, but I know Walker was there. And I think that I think that's kind of what you want there. Certainly, you would think there would be a neutral site. If like you had two schools playing that weren't from the same city. What gets really weird is what's 3A going to look like? You could theoretically have a team from Austin, a team from the Metroplex, and a team from San Antonio all in there. So that makes it, maybe in that case, it does make more sense to just play it at the SPC site. The other thing is, if you're doing it at an SPC site, are you like they assign host schools? If you assign Arlington, does that mean, that they're going to play two playoff games at Oak Ridge? Or are they going to go out and find like a district stadium? There's a lot of questions there to answer, but I hope it passes because that's going to be a ton of excitement. It keeps things interesting. It keeps the fight going. It's like, you can lose two, maybe even three games depending on that, and you can still find your way in. Normally, like when I played, it was you had to win every single SPC game. If you lost one, it was your back was against the wall the whole year. And there's two sides that you can be the eliminator, like we eliminated Episcopal my senior year, like that's awesome. But at the same time, losing to ESD, we had our backs against the wall the rest of the season. We had Episcopal coming up, who finished 3-6 that year, but played a really tough schedule and just couldn't really put it together. They had a lot of talented pieces.
Yeah,
So I
and
guess
that
all of
for
that.
me is the really interesting dichotomy is that expanding the playoff makes the really intense pressure we see in the SBC conference games that's really unique to the conference a little dissipated. However, I think it's more than made up for by the fact that you have the expanded playoff and the fact that a team that everyone might have scoffed at in the preseason could go out and win everything. I think from a media perspective, that's some of the coolest storylines that we could possibly have is, seeing a 4 seed sneak in there and, oh my God, they knocked off Kincaid around. Well, holy crap, they beat Episcopal. They won the state championship. I just think just projecting to see that materialize, I'm very excited to see.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome. That's what you want to see. You know, we have a long ways to go before we get there. I like 2026. It will come soon, but we have some time, and it will really be interesting to see. But I'm glad to get this news now. And I'm happy for those programs. The more the merrier. I think more teams is better. It's more competitive. It's more fun. It was really like it wasn't great when you saw like in 2022 like Kincaid had four conference games. Like I was thinking before the season, are they going to do a home and home with each team and do 8 games like and one counter and one non-counter or both games counter like you know uh,
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
I'm
something we've
happy
gotten
for
a
it.
bit fatigued of, even in TAPS in the past several years. And Ryan talks about this extensively, but going into the season, you look at the lists for the conference and the schedules, and you can already write in the championship game, the state champions, especially in SBC. In the past couple years, in 3A, it's TVS and Houston Christian. In 4A,
Mhm.
it's Kincaid and Episcopal with an asterisk by St. John's to see if Cole Allen does something crazy.
Right.
I'm not going to say it's going to be completely different moving forward. There's going to be some shakeup, obviously, with I love Houston Christian moving up, ESD moving down, throws a monkey wrench in everything. However, all we've seen in TAPS, especially more parity come back into play. Prestonwood and D1 makes things really interesting in that district, especially with obviously Liberty moving up and kind of taking the centralized power of Parish and moving it away. I'm curious to see how much that happens in the SBC because there's a lot of power consolidated within Kincaid, Episcopal, and I'm not even going to say Houston Christian because they didn't become a power until recent years. It's
Mhm.
going to be really, really fun, and I'm sure that you think the same.
Yeah, and I want to see how things play out this year. I would say that, St. Stephen's and St. Mary's have a long, long road ahead. Historically, like those have not been, strong programs. Those have been kind of, not again, no slight at them, but they've just kind of been bottom feeders. I'm not expecting a whole lot out of them. TMI is going to be interesting. I think they have the ability, as they were last season, to win a couple games. I think Green Hill's going to struggle out of the gate coming into 4A. I think Houston Christian also is going to, I think they're also going to struggle. They'll be better. I know Cooper struggled this past year. I haven't. St. Mark's is taking steps forward, but they still have a ways to go. But like, we were talking about this beforehand. If you know, holding all else equal, and that's a big if, because a lot can change this year. Like, if this is what it becomes, like, and I had to pick my preseason top seven for 4A, I'm sorry, I'm putting St. Mark's in the playoffs. Like based on what I saw last year and what I anticipate to happen this year, like 3A, I don't think anybody could be asked to do that. You can pencil in TVS, you can pencil in ESD. I'd probably throw in Country Day in there, but that's kind of an if. Like I think it'll be good for a program like St. Mark's who, has struggled a lot. Like I think it's gonna be good. 3 years ago, or St. Mark's was in a four-team conference, losing every game. Like, it'll be fun to see. I'm excited to see how things shake out, and hopefully it passes. But if not, the realignment stuff, to my knowledge, is complete. So we'll still see, some new matchups, new-ish matchups. They what's new is old, or what's old is new. Like that whole kind of thing. A lot of stuff's coming full circle. I'm happy for these programs that are making the jump from 6-man to 11-man, programs that are coming back. Overall, like you said, I think that ESD moving down does move the needle. I don't think Houston Christian and Green Hill coming back up, like it moves the needle for them, but for the conference, it doesn't. TMI might move the needle a little bit. St. Stephen's, St. Mary's, even St. Andrews, because they're so new, like that doesn't do a whole lot. But it's so cool. Like, there hasn't been like a whole lot of excitement, you know, like this. This is a big storyline in SPC, especially if the playoffs get passed.
Definitely so. It brings some new life into the conference. Not that there hasn't been life, because like we said, SPC has been the conference of chaos the past couple years and one of the more fun storylines we get to in the fall. But I really enjoy this, especially the changes coming with realignment, especially if the playoff expands in 26. These are all good things. It'd be really funny if we talked about this for about an hour and then the playoff doesn't pass and about 45 minutes the episode is mute. Like we said, I don't think that will happen. However, you can never be completely sure. But Jack, a lot of really, really good stuff on the episode today. Closing thoughts from realignment to playoff expansion to the overall picture of SPC as we move forward into another year.
Yeah, I mean, this year, I still early. Summer workouts are going to be in full swing soon, 7-on-7. I don't know if you guys are making it down to 7-on-7 for state. I may try to swing that as well. I'm excited for the season. I'll be rooting hard, for Kincaid as always, but for all of the SPC teams. I think as it stands right now, I think Kincaid's the favorite, but I know Episcopal has some solid transfers in. But like putting that aside, like looking forward, look, ESD going down is big. They should slide into the favorite in that division, and I mean, that'll be good for them. They're gonna, they should kind of run over some of these teams, and I mean, like it's been a little bit of a struggle for them, like, but at the same time, like, they could compete at the 4A level, which is why I was surprised about this. At the same time, Houston Christian and Green Hill moving up. Houston Christian's probably ready to take that leap. Green Hill's going to have some growing pains. Houston
And
Christian
see,
will
I'll
too.
interrupt you just because I feel like it I don't like seeing Green Hill move up because it was so cool to finally see them from being the dogs of the SBC.
I mean, they
Finally
lost like
this year,
30 plus games in a
in,
row.
in the last week of the season, they had a chance to play for an SBC championship, and sadly
Right.
they lost to Oak Ridge. But that'd be such a cool storyline moving forward to see. And I love what Coach KJ is doing. I think he's a
For
perfect
sure.
fit there. It just on one hand, it stinks they move up. On the other hand, I know it's good overall for the school. They're investing a ton back into their program. I'm not going to come out and say in the next 3 years they'll be competing for a title. I think over the long term, this is a good move, and it's going to be really exciting to see for them.
I agree. And then at the bottom, TMI should win a couple games. Initially, St. Mary's and St. Stephen's are really going to struggle. I mean, they're slated to join. They certainly, may not be able to ramp up in time, and that's something I probably should have mentioned. I know I alluded to, but there's a chance they may not be ready to take that step into SBC, and I think they reserve the right to do that. But if they can get it ramped up, that's a 9-team conference. It means 8 conference games. That's a lot. Like that's a big slate, and I mean, even 4A is gonna go to you know gonna go to 7, no, 6 conference games. It should. I thought it was going to be 7 because I didn't think EST was moving down. but it'll be to six. 7 team conference, four non-conference. Like that's a big departure from what's been going on. Now it's 5-5. Like, you know, it's gonna be if I know like Coach Larned really likes to schedule tough non-conference opponents. I still think that he's going to do that and succeed at that. But at the same time, that's two less games to get ready for conference play. Like that will make a difference. When last year they went out and they played Gunter, they played Second Baptist, they played St. Thomas. Rockport Fulton was whatever. They played Regents. Like this year, it's going to be tough to get kind of to replicate that, and I think every team is going to have to adjust to that. I'm sure that they'll be fine with that. I guess it only goes from 5 to 4 now that I think about it because it's not 7. That'll be a bigger issue for 3. I kind of misspoke there. I keep thinking that ESD is going to be in 4A. Like I like that's so like foreign to me. Like that they're going to be moving down. Like I couldn't believe that when I got word of that. Like that was the surprise to me. Houston Christian and Green Hill moving up. Like they've had numbers to do that, and they've been staying down because it's maybe a more level playing field. But ESD moving down is wild, and I don't think like some of those lower teams, like if you put like St. Mary's against ESD in 2026, that's not even going to be fair, as it currently stands. Maybe St. Mary's comes out and shocks the world. I don't know what they're able to build there, but like as it currently stands, like that's a game where it's going to be like 63-0, like 56-0, like that's 49-0, like that's kind of what you're looking at there. So all of that to say, I think it's good for the league. I'm excited about it. I hope the playoffs pass. That's kind of my big thing. The realignment's interesting, like we discussed. I think ESD moving down is kind of the big headline there. And I'm excited to see how it goes. But first and foremost, we got to get through this season, and it's going to be a very, very exciting season. I'm looking forward to doing the same kind of thing. We will have a larger SPC preview, probably sometime in August is when we've been doing it, and then afterwards I will probably pop in. I will definitely pop in before the SPC championship, and it wouldn't shock me if I'm in there for some combination of the Kincaid St. John's game, Kincaid Episcopal game, and the St. John's Episcopal game. Any of those or some combination. You'll be seeing me, but until then, for something like this, if there's anything, because I want to make sure, like I spent a lot of time on this. If there's something that maybe I didn't express 100%, I welcome feedback and even constructive criticism. So if anybody out there, has kind of like a different perspective to what I said or wants to or correct me, we welcome that. I want to make sure with something like this where there's a lot of speculation involved, it's easy to misspeak. So, and it's something as kind of low stakes like this, I am really, really happy to welcome other points of view. And I may be doing if we can engage like on the website, if you can hit me on my socials at Jack M Klosek on X, or Jack Klosek on Instagram. Would welcome to talk about this, and if we can gather more information, maybe we can do a smaller follow up. But Wes, as always, it was a pleasure to take part in this. This was a really fun episode for me. I got to dive into some of the history of SPC and also talk about what's to come, and I'm very, very excited.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for joining. Your knowledge and the depth of it in the Southwest Preparatory Conference is unmatched across the land. It's always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you and hear the direction that probably the most well-established private school conference in Texas is taking. But as always, Jack, thank you for coming on. I have been half of your hosting crew for this episode. Jack Klosek has fantastically been himself. We will see you in the next episode. See you later.